Are you listening? Damn. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And welcome into another episode of the Damn Podcast here on the 24/7 Sports Podcast Network and powered by BeaverBlitz.com. I'm your host, Carter Bahns. I'm flying solo tonight as Angie Machado is out with an illness that has hit multiple media members covering Oregon State. Las Vegas did a number on the media covering the Beavs. But I am here tonight for a special episode of the Damn Podcast. Breaking news, this is an emergency pod. Former Clemson quarterback DJ Uiagalelei is set to transfer to Oregon State. DJ U will be a Beav. It was first reported by ESPN's Pete Thamel. BeaverBlitz confirmed the report via sources saying that it is essentially a done deal. It's big news for Oregon State, and I'm here to break it down. The YouTube chat is flying off the charts. BeaverBlitz, the Lodge, we've got damn questions left and right. Twitter is on fire. Excuse me. We're in for a good show here as I fly solo. Bear with me. This is going to be all over the place. But feel free if you're watching live on YouTube, drop anything you want in the chat, and I'm going to try to highlight as much stuff as I can. We're reacting to this together. This was frankly something that kind of came out of left field. We knew that DJU was on Oregon State's radar. We knew the Beavs were interested and that he was interested in the Beavs. But an announcement, of course, still yet to come. But the report and then eventually, the confirmation that this is going to happen, this was all news to us as of tonight. So we are still very much in the instant reaction, instant analysis phase of this. But let's jump in, first of all, to, I guess, just kind of the shockwaves this is going to send around the country. So DJU, a former five-star quarterback out of St. John Bosco in Southern California, he was the number 2 recruit per 24/7 Sports in the 2020 class, goes to Clemson, immediately starts in that COVID season, and has been Clemson's starter since then. The only player ranked higher than him in the top 247 in 2020 was Alabama's Bryce Young, who, of course, won the Heisman Trophy last year. So, I mean, you get the caliber of player that Oregon State is getting here. If you head to BeaverBlitz.com, I ran through where DJU would rank on Oregon State's all-time commit list had he signed out of high school. Give you a little spoiler alert here. He's number 1, and it's not close. That is the caliber of player that is coming to Corvallis. This is easily... I mean, it's hands down the most talented player that has ever committed to Oregon State, whether that's via high school, via transfer portal, grad transfer, you name it. This is the biggest news personnel wise, I think in Oregon State football history. So let's start with some damn questions from BeaverBlitz, because I want to highlight the Lodge members here. Again, if you're not a member of BeaverBlitz.com, head over there. We've got a 50% off deal. These things, they pop up every now and then, but it's not like you can get a discount on your subscription every day. So now's the time. Join us. Conversation in the Lodge, like I said, is at an all-time high. And that's where we start with these damn questions as we break down DJ Uiagalelei's transfer to Oregon State. We start with number 1. I like Beavs on the damn questions thread at BeaverBlitz. How excited are you? So this is obviously directed at me. Very excited to get to cover this. This is hands down the biggest news of my career that we have broken or that covered at least at Oregon State. Of course, Pete Thamel again breaking the news just a couple short hours ago as we sit here at 8:08 p.m. Pacific. Druzy10 asks if DJ was on this year's team all year, where do we end up? I think Oregon State's probably playing in a Rose Bowl if DJU is the quarterback of this 2022 team. We talked going into the season about Oregon State being, quote unquote, a quarterback away from being really elite. And going back last year to the recruiting process of the transfer portal with JT Daniels. Angie and I sat here on the damn podcast and said Oregon State could be a 10, 11, for all we know, a 12-win team if JT Daniels commits to Oregon State. Obviously, he ends up going to West Virginia, but it did feel like, at least preseason, that Oregon State was going to be an average to above average to great quarterback away from, truthfully, being in the mix for the Pac-12 title in a Rose Bowl. As we sit here now, after the 2022 season comes to a close, it's very obvious that Oregon State was in that boat. And I think it's fair to say if Oregon State got a little bit better quarterback play in 22, we'd see the Beavs in Vegas playing for the Pac-12 title, not the Las Vegas Bowl. So I think moving forward, that poses the question, well, what can Oregon State do with DJU in 2023? Again, it's December, so it's a little tough to look that far ahead, especially when we don't even know the personnel Oregon State's going to have, particularly on defense, with a couple of guys still waiting to announce whether they're going to return or go to the NFL. But off the top of my head, I would say Oregon State's offense immediately jumps up a couple of notches. I mean, for anyone who hasn't watched DJ Uiagalelei play, or who doesn't understand necessarily the caliber of quarterback he is, I keep comparing. I compare this a lot to Bo Nix transferring to Oregon, a player who went to Clemson as a very highly rated recruit. Had all of the expectations in the world. Started off pretty strong, but then kind of tailed off over the last year or so. But then I think finds a good landing place and goes to a system that can put him in positions to be more successful. And you saw what happened with Bo Nix, who was in a very similar situation. All the expectations in the world at Auburn didn't pan out to the extent that the Tiger fans had hoped for. Went to Oregon, and then he's a Heisman candidate. So I'm not going to say DJU is going to be a finalist standing in New York next December, but I think it's very reminiscent of what transpired in Eugene. So I'm curious to see if DJ can kind of follow that path. I think it's a very similar situation. And, for anyone that might latch on to some of the struggles that DJ had at Clemson last year, and even in 2021 to an extent, everything I've seen from the Clemson offense suggests this is a guy who is more talented than what they're getting out of him. Again, like Bo Nix at Auburn, I think when he came to Oregon, it was very clear that he was, a 4 or 5 star caliber player that just wasn't being utilized to reach his potential. And I think we're seeing kind of a similar situation unfold with DJU. Let's go to our next question from the Lodge at BeaverBlitz.com. BeaverShark123 asks, how does DJU transferring here affect players on the fence about going to the draft? Well, I mean, again, the guys that I highlighted are mostly defense, and guys that come to mind are Omar Spates, Alex Austin, Katano Ladapo. Again, still waiting to hear whether they're going to come back to Oregon State or head to the draft. They're defensive, so they're not immediately impacted by DJ coming in. If there was a receiver or two who might have been on the fence, or an offensive lineman, I'd say, okay, well, there's a tie that you can make. Okay, well, he's going to throw to him, so he might be more likely to come back. So I don't think it has a direct correlation, but I do think those guys can look and say, well, this is how good we were with a mediocre offense. How good are we going to look if our offense is even better? So I do think there is incentive, more so even now, for those guys to come back. Reeser Beef 23 asks, will he be here winter or spring term? How high could Oregon State be rated next year in the preseason poll? Let's tackle the first part. So winter, spring term. Winter term starts at Oregon State on January. It's the second week of January. I want to say it's about the 7th or so. And so I expect him to be here for winter term. Again, he hasn't even officially announced his transfer yet. So, wait to see. But the transfer portal window, this first window goes through January 18th. So he could theoretically come in after the start of winter term. Now, Oregon State does have about a week and a half, 2-week buffer after the start of the term where you can add classes. So even if he were to come in on the very end of that window, it's entirely likely that he would be registered for classes for winter term. But again, that's something that we're going to have to wait and see on. PDX OSU asks, when do you think he will sign? Now, this is an interesting conversation that I'll give a shout out to Angie for dropping this tidbit when we were texting before the show. Transfers are different than high school and prep and JUCO signees in that they don't actually sign a binding NLI like those guys do. They have they sign a financial aid agreement so that they can get their athletic scholarship, but that's binding for the school, not the student athlete. Essentially, all DJ has to do is sign that, show up to classes, and he's good. So again, the question, when do you think he will sign? It doesn't entirely actually matter. It's just a matter of him showing up for classes either in January or in April. Looking through these questions again. Okay, Reeser Beav with another good one. Will he be a guy needing to get big NIL dollars? This is a question that, of course, in this day and age of college football is going to be raised, and it's a good question. But it's one, frankly, as we sit here, hour and a half, 2 hours after the news broke, we just don't have enough time to kind of dive into that yet. We don't have the answers on what a potential NIL package might look like. But again, in this day and age of college football, it's fair to assume that there is probably some sort of NIL package awaiting him in Corvallis. I'm sure the collectives have probably got something lined up. Again, technically can't use it as inducement, but for a player of DJU's caliber, Oregon State's collectives are probably going to be stepping up here as soon as he arrives on campus. A question on the time frame for transfers to sign. Already kind of acknowledged that they do have through January 18th to arrive and to make it official. Now, before, of course, it was more of a free-for-all, and you could kind of sign and commit and leave and join whenever you wanted. But now with the two transfer portal windows, you have the one in the winter, and then there's a second one in spring. So we assume that he will fall into this winter window by January 18th. Again, just perusing the questions here at BeaverBlitz.com in the Lodge. How do you see this possibly help the program outside of the X's and O's? This is from O State 30. It's a good question. I think DJU has been known for his leadership qualities, and Angie actually posted a video of a press conference that DJU held after Clemson's loss to Syracuse this year. And that was a game in which DJ was benched. He had a pretty rough showing, and frankly had multiple rough showings this season and did get benched. He split time with Cade Klubnik over the final second half of the season. His response to that was about as mature of a response as you're going to hear from a quarterback on any question. Somebody who is entirely team first, one of those just true leaders, and somebody who I think is going to, or it's not like Oregon State's locker room needs uniting, but I think he's somebody who's going to draw the locker room even closer. Ben Gulbranson did a great job of this, stepping in. Didn't know that he was going to be the starter, but stepped in and really united that offense and the entire team around him. I think what DJU brings, even as a quote-unquote outsider coming in from another program, I expect to see some pretty high-level leadership from him there. How similar are the offensive schemes between us and Clemson? Asks 2B Beav. Again, we're so early on, and I will admit that I didn't watch much ACC football this year. That I can't really compare the X's and O's, but I do know this. Again, like the Bo Nix comparison, I think DJ was in a situation at Clemson where he was potentially being underutilized. He has talent all around him, but we have seen some coaching turnover at that program. It's a program that likes to hire from within, doesn't necessarily bring outside voices into the coaching staff. I think you could really see DJ flourish in a new system, regardless of where he ends up. So that's why I'm so high on this, even though he had a bit of a down year this year and did split time with a backup quarterback in Cade Klubnik. More questions coming in from the Lodge. Let's move over to Twitter now, because I did post a question thread over there. Ryan Harlan, shout out Ryan, who covers Oregon State for the Orange Media Network there on campus at Oregon State, asks what's the ceiling of this team if DJ earns the starting job after fall camp. Again, I go back to what we talked about last year with JT Daniels about Oregon State being a Pac-12 title contender if they could get a high-end quarterback to join them. I think that's probably the expectation. Oregon State coming off of a 10-win season, being right there in the Pac-12 title mix, minus, they were about a game back from really being in there. I think you could see Oregon State win 10, 11 games in the regular season next year if it lives up to its potential. And with DJ leading the offense, you have to think that it's going to be in a better position to do so. So I think the ceiling of next year's team, this could sound crazy and, sound like I'm just living in the moment. I think the ceiling for Oregon State is 11-1 or 12-0. I think the Beavers could realistically, if everything pans out and if DJ does, exceed what he provided at Clemson, and if the defense comes back and is as dominant as it was last year, Oregon State could be in the college football playoff. I mean, it's entirely possible. I would say that is probably the highest end of the expectations. But Oregon State could be a college football playoff team next year if it reaches its ceiling. Who would have guessed we'd be saying that entering this 2022 season? But here we are. PM on Twitter says, "Can you say Uiagalelei 5 times fast?" I saw this one rolling right after I sent the tweet. Should we try it? Should we try it? All right, here we go. Uiagalelei, 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 Uiagalelei. Boom, done. Thanks, PM, for giving me the platform to show off that talent. Josh Harley asks, question number 1, how do you pronounce Uiagalelei? There you go. Let's see. William Schulten, again, this is kind of tongue-in-cheek, but between DJ and Martinez, will we ever throw the ball again? Good question. I think you see Oregon State, even with improved quarterback play, potentially with DJ, I think you will still see Oregon State really commit to the run. DJ is one of the premier dual threat quarterbacks in the country. Not necessarily known for it out of high school. He was actually a pro-style quarterback in our database, whereas Bryce Young was a dual threat quarterback. So DJ was actually the number 1 pro-style quarterback in our database out of high school. He has really developed as a runner during his time at Clemson, and I'm going to try to pull up the stats here. Again, lots of multitasking. But here's DJ's rushing numbers from 2022. He carried the ball 142 times for 545 yards and 7 touchdowns. That's pretty elite when it comes to a running quarterback. He set career highs in multiple categories there. And actually, that's a point I want to highlight here too. We can talk about this being a down year for DJ and him not living up to expectations or whatnot. He still set career highs in like 5 or 6 different categories. All right, so let's run through some of his numbers overall. Completed 61.9% of his passes for 2,521 yards, 22 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions. That might not be living up to 5-star expectations, but that's far and away better than anything Oregon State was going to get out of its quarterback room this year. So you will take that if you're an Oregon State fan, not to mention what he does as a runner. A dual threat ability unlike any I think that Oregon State has ever seen. Let's go back to Twitter for a couple more questions, and then I'll kind of scroll through the YouTube chat and see if we can highlight some of those as well. Josh Hill asks, is he a day 1 starter if healthy, or will Smith make him earn it in a competition? I like this question. Jonathan Smith, throughout the last 5 years and having these quarterback competitions in camp, having guys like Chance Nolan transfer in, who we all thought, was the obvious starter when he committed as the number 1 quarterback of junior college. Jonathan Smith has made every single one of his quarterbacks earn the job. Now, we've waited until game week, game day, even to find out who QB1 is going to be in the past. I'm curious to see how that plays out if and when DJ arrives on campus for spring camp and then, of course, for fall camp. I would assume that this will be defined as a competition at least through the spring, just until he kind of gets his feet wet in Corvallis. But I would imagine, assuming he does have all of spring to kind of ramp up and familiarize himself with everything, I would imagine that entering fall camp in August, DJ would be likely named the starter. He's frankly just that much better than anything or than anyone Oregon State has, and that includes Aiden Childs, who comes in as a 4-star quarterback. Here's another discussion we can have: is DJU kind of just bridging the gap between Oregon State's quarterback situation now and eventually getting to Aiden Childs? And I think the answer is yes. DJU will have 3 years to play too, and I think getting 2 years out of DJ would be enough to kind of transition into the Aiden Childs era, giving him 2 full years to develop behind a 5-star quarterback would be absolutely huge. This is a discussion we've had at BeaverBlitz about Aiden Childs being the quarterback of the future, but maybe not necessarily as a true freshman. All right. Like, he's enrolling early in January as essentially a senior in high school. And it's very difficult to get high-end quarterback play from somebody who steps in as a true freshman. Obviously, DJ, you did that at Clemson 2 years ago, but expecting that out of Aiden Childs is, that's probably a bit unfair to him. So maybe you get 1 year of DJ, he goes pro, and then you transition into Childs in 2024. Maybe you get 2 years of DJ, and that gives Aiden enough time to develop. But I think regardless, it's you see DJ in an Oregon State uniform for at least a year, and then you go to Aiden Childs. And again, to Ben Gulbranson, who started more than half of the season for Oregon State and only lost 1 game, very game manager-esque quarterback, did exactly what was asked of him, won a bunch of games. But again, I think if you're talking caliber of quarterback, DJ steps in as far and away your best option at that position. Let's see if there's more Twitter questions. Kevin asks, has anyone other than Pete Thamel confirmed him coming to Oregon State? Yeah, at BeaverBlitz, we have contacted our sources, and they have indicated that this is, for all intents and purposes, a done deal. It's just a matter of him showing up. So there's your answer to that one. Griff asks, how is this going to work with the signing of Childs? Again, Aiden Childs is he's likely not going anywhere. He just signed his letter of intent 2 days ago. And I don't necessarily know that he was. In fact, I could tell you, Oregon State's probably not guaranteeing anyone a starting job, particularly a true freshman. So I think Aiden Childs just it's in his best interest to get a little bit of development under his belt before he steps in as a starter, because again, it's very difficult to do that. But I don't see this as being a major deterrent to an incoming freshman, particularly one as talented as Aiden Childs. All right, let's move over to the YouTube chat. Again, these comments and questions are coming in so quickly that it's hard to keep up, but I'll see if I can find any that we should highlight here. Here's a good one from, I believe this is Adam Nicholson. If so, thanks, Adam, for joining us. Is this more of a feather in the cap for the coaches in recruiting DJ, or was there some peer-to-peer recruitment that lured DJ to Oregon State? If there was peer-to-peer recruitment, it was through back channels that didn't make it out into the public, because I haven't seen anything on Twitter or Instagram that, at least that I can remember, about players effectively recruiting him. We'll say they could, because he is officially in the portal, so you can actively recruit players like that who are in the portal. Go through some of these other comments. Yeah, PM again says, I cannot wait to see DJU and Martinez in some RPO. DJ is your prototypical RPO quarterback. If you're going to run the run pass option, you want a guy who can do both things as effectively as DJ. It's that running ability in particular that makes that so intriguing. That 1-2 punch there in the running game, man, Oregon State's going to be absolutely loaded. Jaden says DJ backed up Trevor Lawrence 1 year. Can't remember. I can't remember what draft class Trevor Lawrence was. DJ's freshman year was in 2020, so I don't know if their timelines actually lined up. But I would have to go back and look. I don't, of course, follow ACC football as closely as I follow the Pac-12 and Oregon State. PNW Bills, Reeser's going to be cracking in 9 months. Yeah, I would fully expect Reeser Stadium to be pretty fired up for week 1 next year, considering the season Oregon State's coming off of it. And with this on top of it, I think expectations at Oregon State are going to be just about as high as they've ever been. This question, do you know if he visited the OSU campus yet? As far as I'm aware, he has not visited, and we're in a dead period right now. So Oregon State can't host any more visitors until the new year. This was actually something that came about as a result of the Las Vegas Bowl being so early. So Oregon State missed out on that last weekend of potentially hosting visitors. Now, they did host some other transfer portal quarterbacks, and if you haven't heard who visited Corvallis over the last week, it's at BeaverBlitz.com. So there's a good plug for the kind of knowledge that Angie has been dropping in the lodge. But as far as I'm aware, DJ has not visited Corvallis. So this is kind of a sight unseen thing. Now, his brother, Mateo, committed and signed with Oregon on National Signing Day. So, I think it makes it a little bit of a softer landing. And I think that in hindsight now, after this has effectively been made official, looking at the signing of Mateo Uiagalelei to Oregon, I think that's got to be like, I don't want to say nail in the coffin, but it was kind of the final thing that pushed this over the edge is his brother's going to be 45 minutes to the south of him. So I'm sure the family, if they're not relocating to Oregon, I'm sure they'll be making frequent trips to see both of those guys play. His brother, of course, a 5-star defensive lineman heading to Oregon. Oregon State fans, I'm sure, not thrilled to see that on signing day, their rival pulling in a 5-star that they didn't expect to get. But if that's the price you have to pay to get DJ on campus at Oregon State, I think you take that 10 times out of 10. More questions and comments in the YouTube chat coming in. We got questions about the Pac-12 TV deal. We'll get to that in a later episode. Clint Moses says local boys NIL. Absolutely. I could see DJ partnering with the local boys. He's got that Samoan descent. So I think it's a pretty logical fit there. A lot of people just saying they're excited. Absolutely. This is probably the biggest news in recent Oregon State football history. People, we've got pronunciation guides in the YouTube chat. Thanks, PM, again. DJ as a unit and could really give Aiden someone to look up to. PM, I think you're spot on. I think the development that Aiden Childs could get under DJ is second to none. Again, these are coming in so quick. It's hard to keep up with everything. But again, we're coming up on a half hour. I don't want to take too much time here. I see my battery on my camera is running low, so we have to head out before we completely lose you. But Oregon State, again, reportedly and again effectively confirmed, is going to land DJ Uiagalelei from the transfer portal. Probably one of the, if not the biggest transfers in college football this year. You look at the stats and what he did and sharing time at quarterback, and you might say, well, this isn't the caliber of a Caleb Williams to USC, and that's fair. It's not. But I do think that anytime a former 5-star quarterback moves, it's huge news. And for Oregon State, it's massive. It's gargantuan to get a quarterback of that caliber on campus. Again, the highest rated player out of high school to ever make it to campus at Oregon State. Nick says, going to be OSU all day in college football media tomorrow. Yeah, I could see that. I think it comes at an interesting time because obviously we've got the holiday season right around the corner, Christmas this weekend, New Year's next week. So a lot of people are on break. I'll be honest, wasn't expecting to check into work today or tomorrow or Sunday, but this is now on my radar full time. So lots to break down on the DJU front. I think we're going to go ahead and get out of here pretty quickly as we come up on a half hour now. But I'll see if we can highlight a couple more questions from the lodge, because again, these are just flying in left and right. Rio also asks if Hudson Card ever committed anywhere, another quarterback who was on Oregon State's radar, and he hasn't committed yet. I think he was still on Oregon State's radar. Again, this is all still moving so quickly that we don't have we don't have all of the information we want on this yet. But Hudson Card, of course, obviously now not coming to Oregon State, but Oregon State from day one of this transfer portal window was so clearly involved in trying to land a high-level quarterback, swinging for the fences. Hudson Card was one of those swing for the fences kind of guys. And even if you don't land him, I don't necessarily think that DJ Uiagalelei is much of a step down from Hudson Card. And in fact, you could argue that he's a step up. So missing out on Hudson, not necessarily too much of a backbreaker for Oregon State. Here's a good one. How do you think DJ will look under Smith and Lindgren? This is from Beavers Fan 20 at BeaverBlitz.com. Again, good question. I think, like PM said in the YouTube chat, you're going to see a lot of RPOs. Oregon State hasn't necessarily been able to run that with Ben Gulbranson, but we've seen Ben become more and more mobile. So that is in the playbook. They ran some RPO when Chance Nolan was quarterback as well. You'll see designed runs, those quarterback draws that Ben was running. That'll be on the more vanilla side, I would imagine, of what they'll dial up for DJ. But you could see some pretty fun play designs with him as a dual threat quarterback. I'll look through a couple more of these. Again, the battery's running low, and I've been rambling for over a half hour. We're gonna be a little hoarse after this. PM, oh yeah, nice. PM asked on Beaver Blitz as well for me to say Uiagalelei 5 times fast. Maybe I'll do that one more time before we get out. We could close the show on that. More questions about Aiden Childs looking up to DJ. Yeah, I think that's something to watch moving forward now is how this kind of ripples through the rest of the roster and how this creates waves throughout the Pac-12 and the college landscape. Oregon State, I think, was one of the premier destinations for a transfer portal quarterback. Obviously, in the end, it ends up as that. But the Beavers were well in play for all of the high-end quarterbacks: Hudson Card, Keaton Slovis, DJU. Oregon State was a very realistic destination for all of them. And I think one of the most attractive options, I look at Georgia as probably being the number one. Stetson Bennett moving on. You inherit a team that is coming off of a national championship, is looking like it's well on its way to another one. I think that's going to be a pretty good landing spot. But Oregon State right up there, arguably for the number 2, maybe number 3 spot for a transfer quarterback. So ultimately you see that come to fruition as the Beavers land, again, a player who was the number 2 recruit out of high school at St. John Bosco in 2020. So I just can't emphasize enough the fact that Oregon State is increasing its talent level by a pretty insane amount here. Again, the highest rated player to ever end up on campus at Oregon State, assuming he does here, as the transfer portal window reaches about a month left and winter classes start in about 2 weeks in Corvallis. All right, running out of wind here, so we're gonna have to wrap this up. Want to give a shout out to Angie before we leave, though, for her coverage of Oregon State's efforts in the transfer portal. If you have not been in the lodge at Beaver Blitz over the last week, you have missed out. But of course, this kind of coverage is nonstop. Angie has been working the phones so insanely hard. She's under the weather and can't join us on this episode of the podcast, but her insight and her sourcing has been absolutely second to none throughout this entire transfer portal quarterback searching process. Have to give massive props to Angie. And I think, okay, here, we'll leave on this. Connor asks who has better hair, me or Angie. I'll leave that up to the viewers here on the YouTube side. All right. Yeah, I think that's just about all I've got in the tank. Covered all sorts of questions. We're going to be covering this for weeks to come, months, probably years at BeaverBlitz as we work to figure out what this means for Oregon State. So head to BeaverBlitz over the next, who knows how long as we try to figure out what this means. But I think that's probably going to do it for us here. I'll say Uiagalelei 5 times fast again if you want, and then I'll hit the outro. Should we do it? Let's see if there's any more comments first. Okay, there we go. PM. Got to go with Carter. Not gonna lie on the hair front. Thank you, PM. Angie, don't take it personally. All right, I think that's gonna wrap it up. Here we go. Here's one. Uiagalelei, 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 Uiagalelei. 5 times fast for you as we get out of here on this emergency episode of the damn podcast. Again, DJ U heading to Oregon State via the transfer portal. Stick with BeaverBlitz. We're going to be covering it for as long as it takes to figure out what this means for Oregon State. Continuing coverage at beaverblitz.com. Thanks for joining us on short notice if you're on YouTube. Thanks for listening on the podcast side. We'll talk to you again sometime before the end of the year or in early January, hopefully with Angie, healthy Angie by then, on another episode of the Damn Podcast.